I'm not okay. And I want to tell you why. I want to tell you about empathy and pain. And I want to tell you how hurt compounds across generations and communities. How it builds itself up on those who are already carrying more than they should ever be asked to. How pain crushes those who we should be protecting the most. And how it breaks my heart and crushes me too. I want you to know why I'm not okay right now. And why it's okay that I'm not okay. And why it is most definitely not. Let me start where I think everyone is right now. Because the world feels fucking hard, right? These past 2 years with the pandemic, I don't think there is a single human being on this planet who hasn't felt it in some way, shape, or form, and has felt the weight of it. Some more than others, for sure. Definitely. And there have been some who have tried to refuse that weight, very, very actively so. But it's something that's touched us all. The isolation, the loneliness, the constant fear and anxiety, the loss of those closest to us. Like I lost my grandmother and my grandfather during all this. These past 2 years have felt like a weight that we have all had to carry. And many of us will carry the weight of it for our entire lives, in both big and small ways. I mean, speaking of small ways, I don't think I'll ever truly feel comfortable standing close to someone in a line ever again. At least not for a very long while. And I'm sure every country has had their own specific things and worries, some better, some worse than my experience here in the United States. Or we could talk about how now in Ukraine, there's a lot going on there. And the anger and fear and worry that event has caused around the world in numerous different ways, and the very real violence it has wrought upon those living there. Here in the United States where I live, this anxiety and stress can actually and has been measured. One study recently found that over 80% of Americans are experiencing significant sources of stress due to Ukraine, the pandemic, and financial worries, an all-time high in the United States, where our previous levels had only hit around 60%. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say, in many different scales and ways, all of us are carrying the weight of the world on us right now. Some much more than others, but all of us are feeling it. And yet, some of us are carrying even more than just those specific events. Some, a lot more. And I want to tell you about a specific group of people that are carrying more. We're not the only ones, but we are ones. Because even though there's been so much going on these past few weeks, months, years, there have been some who have had more and more piled on top of it. In just the last couple weeks, Florida passed its Don't Say Gay bill, a bill which attempts to ban the discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity in classrooms, and also could out transgender and LGBTQ kids in general to their parents or the community before they wish it to be known, which puts them in significant danger. Meanwhile, in Texas and Idaho, laws have been passed that labels parents trying to seek affirming care for their transgender children as child abusers. Now, some of these laws haven't been signed into actual law, but they have passed different parts of their state governments. Despite the fact that, as one parent in Texas put it, they don't see not working to give their child the absolute standard of care they deserve, trans or not, as even an option. Her son attempted suicide multiple times, she explained. First when he was just 9 years old. When he came out as trans and started wearing different clothing and using male pronouns, she said she heard him laugh for the first time in a long time. Seeking care for a transgender child as a parent is just part of being a good parent. Gender-affirming medical care for kids is largely uncontroversial in the medical community. Every major medical association, including the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, advocates that young people who have gender dysphoria should be connected to gender-affirming care to ease depression, anxiety, and suicidality. Or how in Texas, the first parent being investigated under this policy was a parent who was literally working for child services that investigate abuse and would know full well what abuse is, which isn't trying to find affirming care for your transgender child. The hypocrisy of that. Or how in Idaho, this care, which should be standard, has been made into a felony, at least if the law that they're trying to pass gets enacted. How the law even states that if a parent tries to leave the state to try to give their child the care they need, they will still face felony charges. Or take how these narratives of child abuse are pushed by people spreading misinformation about what trans people are actually asking for. For example, how these laws labeling trans-affirming care as child abuse often cites gender confirmation surgeries like breast reduction or vaginoplasties as being given to children, which isn't the case. In almost all cases, trans-affirming care is just giving children a chance to express themselves with pronouns, clothing, and more, and being given access to doctors and therapists who can listen and help. Only when they get older are they potentially given safe and reversible puberty blockers, and they must be older still to get gender confirmation surgeries, which require sign-offs by therapists and doctors before happening as well.
Transition for young kids is so low stakes and simple. It's literally just wearing clothing that makes you feel good. It's using a name, maybe a different name, maybe the same name, that makes you feel good. It's wearing your hair a certain way. And I think the intention here is, from political extremists, is to promulgate the most shocking rhetoric available to scare people into thinking that dangerous things are happening with transgender kids and transgender people. It's really not. All of this is considered safe, evidence-based, standard practice, medically necessary care. And it's highly individualized and personalized, and it should remain private. You know, at the end of the day, no child's medical care should be weaponized for political gain. No child. Every child deserves the ability to have private medical care and to not have it publicized and politicized.
Or beyond that, take the simple fact that I have had to keep adding to this list of things between when I came up with this video concept to when I'm filming it. And how between now and when this video goes up for you watching it, that list has probably grown even longer. But that's not even the first go-round of all of this either, is it? The past few months and years, hell, decades, these sort of attacks on transgender people have become more and more common, more overt, more targeted. The numerous bills banning transgender people in sports, just targeting a single identity for exclusion without a nuanced look at what it means to try to be inclusive of sports, has been a constant talking point for the past year. How one version that was passed, again in Florida, would require genital inspections on children to confirm their biological identity. Like, what the hell? That's gross and disgusting and terrifying. Or take the endless anti-transgender bathroom bills that have almost been passed in numerous states over the past few years, making transgender people feel unsafe and unwelcome in public spaces even if these laws don't pass. Not even able to pee without feeling uncomfortable, unwanted, worried about being attacked or unsafe, just for a common bodily human function. Or take the nigh constant attacks on transgender people in the news media, in political rhetoric. Or going back even further, the ban on transgender people from the military under President Trump. Or the attempt by the Department of Health and Human Services in 2018 to try to define transgender people out of legal existence in order to remove protections for us under the law. Or think about it in other ways, big and small. Like a comedian that you once enjoyed, or a writer of a book series that meant so much to you, to so many. Or a company that has made so many of your childhood classics and nearly controls an entire industry, using their platforms to promote or support the very bigotry that attacks the entire transgender community. Or giant news organizations like the BBC in the United Kingdom platforming anti-trans rhetoric, or even women who have called for the genocide of trans people in their articles. The attacks on transgender people over the past few years have not only been relentless, but big and public and wide-reaching. It feels like every morning there's yet another event, another law, another public figure citing transgender people as the doom of society, as horrible people, as something needed to be legislated, or child abuse, or spreading misinformation, or attacking our rights, or even our basic human dignity, our ability to feel comfortable in our own skin and in our communities and public spaces. And what hurts more is that many of these cases, the people that it targets are those least equipped to fight back. Children. Trans kids in Florida, Idaho, and Texas have all felt these attacks recently, and anti-trans sports bills are often aimed at school sports specifically. Not to mention how often rhetoric from anti-trans groups like the gender-critical, aka TERF movement, often push misinformation around things like puberty blockers or kids coming out as trans at a young age, because we're talking about trans and gender identity more often now, to use the "please think of the children" concept to push their attacks and vitriol, when what they're doing is anything but thinking of children, especially the trans children most in need of being seen, supported, heard, and affirmed. How these attacks make children feel isolated not only from their country, not only from their government, but their community. They're pivotal figures like teachers and doctors who suddenly may turn against them because of a law that they have no control over. Even families who aren't currently under investigation say the last 2 weeks since Abbott released his directive have been traumatizing. In Houston, N, a 15-year-old who is transmasculine, said things have been, quote, awful. It was hard to stay in one piece and not break down on everything, he said. A lot of feelings, a lot of dissociation, and hardness to just keep everything in control. She said her daughter, who usually doesn't cry, had tears running down her cheeks, and she asked, "Am I going to die?" I said no. I pulled over. I went, "Why would you ask me that?" Kay said. She went, "Because everybody hates me." But it even may distance them from the people that they should trust the most, their parents. Take, for example, how many TERF groups tell parents that they should isolate their child from friends and social media if they even think that they're trans, because gender ideology has influenced them. How many of these children, even if things change tomorrow or the next day, which it won't, how these children will carry this weight their entire lives because they weren't given the support that they needed at this critical time. And I'm not even talking about medical care, but supportive care, care of people who understand them and affirm them, let them explore who they are. Some may not get that care before the weight that they are being forced to carry against their will becomes too much for them. There's a reason the suicide rate for trans kids is higher than most any other group. And it's because of all this burden that they've been asked to carry, often alone, and made to feel like they'll never be able to put it down. And yet, how even as your heart breaks for all of that, how those of us who speak up about these proven injustices are told that we're wrong, that we're terrible, that we're pedophiles and child groomers. Take, for example, Florida Governor DeSantis' press secretary Christian Pushaw stating, "The bill that liberals inaccurately call Don't Say Gay would be more accurately described as an anti-grooming bill. If you're against the anti-grooming bill, you are probably a groomer, or at least you don't denounce the grooming of 4 to 8-year-old children. Silence is complicity. This is how it works, Democrats, and I don't make the rules." Using age-old homophobic and transphobic rhetoric of LGBTQ people as somehow being inherently sexual predators. Just like the bills themselves do, labeling parents as abusers. Or take, for example, how Florida Governor DeSantis himself said that he would try his best to make sure the Don't Say Gay bill wouldn't cause undue harm to the LGBTQ community. I didn't realize that we were do harm. But I guess if you're going to label us all child abusers, maybe you think that we do. Even further, trans people can rarely avoid transphobic attacks and misinformation even if we try to avoid it. Take, for example, how I stopped following J.K. Rowling years ago, yet however, every single time she tweets about trans people, I wake up to my Twitter timeline full of discussions about her and the often misinformation and transphobic rhetoric she spouts. It's because my community, the trans community online, is obviously invested in trying to debunk and push back against her transphobic misinformation. And this is just one example of how trans people algorithmically are constantly confronted with transphobia whenever and wherever it happens because of the way algorithms work to surface things relevant to a community at all times. So we constantly have to hear and see every single piece of transphobic rhetoric at all times that it happens, regardless of our desire to engage in it, if we desire to form trans-inclusive communities online. A nigh necessity for many trans people looking for community that they can't find in their daily physical worlds. But as a result, this constantly being confronted with this transphobic misinformation leads to that burnout that I've been talking about this whole video. Or trans people are also burned out because we're often the ones pressured to explain or educate about these issues, forcing trans people to constantly have to learn about transphobic misinformation just in order to try to tear it down. Think about how once Greg Abbott pushed the anti-trans healthcare guidance into effect, it fell often to trans people and parents of trans kids to push back, educate, spend time speaking out about it, and trying to push lawsuits against it. It's basically a tax on not only our finances, given the amount of money put into this, but also our time and our emotional energy. Not to mention the mental damage it does to constantly confront yourself with narratives of those who actively dehumanize you and being forced to try to understand their mindset at all times. It just constantly wears you down. Not to mention people who will sea lion at you demanding that you explain what TERFs are or explain what a woman is constantly without actually doing the work themselves to look up the answers that are freely available to them, but constantly putting the need to educate on trans people, which they often won't listen to anyways. Or take how when many trans people try to speak up about these things affecting us, we're often told that our problems aren't important enough or even real. For a personal example of this, when I spoke about how my heart broke for kids dealing with issues in Texas on Twitter, one user pointed out to me that there's a war going on in Ukraine, you know. As if because there's a war going on in Ukraine, I shouldn't talk about trans people. Just because one problem is happening doesn't mean you don't care about both, and that we can't talk about something else at the same time, nor that one isn't also important or can have effects that we need to discuss right now. Nor that we should let larger conflicts erase the conflicts of those who are marginalized and hurt. It's not a zero-sum game, nor is it about who is suffering worse. Is what's going on in Ukraine a big, more world-changing event affecting tons more people? Sure, most definitely. But people are still being hurt all the same. And how we don't and shouldn't ignore that, no matter where it's happening, especially when it hits close to home. Hell, the people pushing these bills are using Ukraine for that exact purpose, to distract from what they're actually doing, to try to get people to focus on that while they enact harm in other ways back home. And this isn't even to mention, by the way, that trans people in areas like Ukraine are also suffering and carrying a lot on top of what everyone in Ukraine is dealing with right now. For example, how trans people in Ukraine live in abject fear because of how they know Russia itself treats trans people, and worry what might happen to them if Putin fulfills his imperialist goals. And on top of that, I've only talked about countries I'm most familiar with because I live in them, or I've done a lot of research on them, or because they're being talked about in the media today. But I hear stories from viewers watching my channel of how trans people are treated around the world, vilified in similar ways to what I've discussed, or in many cases much worse and in scarier ways than what I've discussed. How trans folks in other countries around the world suffer the same things that I've been talking about happening in the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, and more, and often much worse, but we don't talk about them in our Western world for numerous reasons, but not the least of which is that we expect it to happen there, because our culture and our media looks down upon these countries as uncivilized, other, and different, when the people living there are just as human as everyone else. How, for example, what is happening in Ukraine is absolutely horrid and terrifying and scary and needs to be fought and pushed back against. And I'm glad that many people are, but how we in our nice bubbles are shocked by it because it's war that happens to people who it wasn't supposed to happen to. Because when these same events happen elsewhere in the world, it's expected. And so no one freaks out or gives it the same notice that it deserves. And how trans people are often some of the most to suffer in that invisibility. For years, transgender people in Ukraine who wanted to be legally recognized had a long list of steps that they had to go through to do so. According to Human Rights Watch, the government mandated that transgender people undergo extensive psychiatric observation and undergo gender reassignment surgery to get legal documents that aligned with their gender. Legislation was introduced in 2017 to lessen the process, but still would require that transgender Ukrainians undergo outpatient psychiatric examinations. There is no indication that legislation was ever implemented. I don't want to go through that. This is like humiliating for the world, Ukrainian trans woman Z Femel said. I decided to keep my passport, keep mail in my passport, and now I cannot leave this country. It's a war within a war. Truly, she said. Having some self-awareness, it's worth pointing out that I, in many ways, am very lucky. I'm not a trans kid. I was at one point, and in many ways I did suffer a lot of the things that I've been talking about here, but more importantly, I was suffering under the invisibility of trans people. I didn't have the words or ability to articulate what it meant to be trans, but I was lucky enough that I was able to find it during my lifetime and able to come out to a family and people who accepted me. I also had no desire to go into the military, for example, or how I've been able to achieve most of my transition-related healthcare needs because I live in a state in America that still gives me access to and how I'm able to afford the healthcare that I need as a trans person, like hormones, affirming doctors, and hopefully soon my last gender confirmation surgery, on top of all the other gender confirmation surgeries that I've already had. And heaven knows I'll never be good enough at any sport for anyone to worry about having to ban me from them. And so by no means do I wish to claim the hurt and pain of anyone else. I don't mean to speak for them or over them. I can't and I won't. I am privileged in so many ways, and I'm honestly, thankful is the wrong word, but I acknowledge it, and I at least appreciate the luck that I've been able to have. And yet, I would also be lying if I didn't say that I still feel the load of all of this. When you're part of a marginalized community, even if you're not directly affected by something that targets part of your community, you still feel it. First of all, it just makes you understand how much the world vilifies you and your identity just for who you are. I may live in a fairly affirming place and have access to the care I need in a community that supports me, but all of that was only afforded me by my privileges and sheer luck. And how even that luck is shaky at best. For example, we're one national vote away from me possibly losing all of that. Or, it's also worth mentioning that even here, in this area that I live that does support me, I still have to face things like transphobia. Literally just the other day when I went to the grocery store, I had someone stop and actively yell at me because I was a trans person in a public space, making me feel less than and scared just for shopping for groceries. They yelled at me in the parking lot, screaming that I'm going to die of AIDS. It's a great thing you want to hear when you're just shopping for groceries. And by the way, speaking of that, we should also talk about how traumas are carried by communities through generations. You know, I wasn't alive during the AIDS epidemic as it ravaged the LGBTQ community, as people like President Reagan literally laughed and others called it the gay virus, and that the LGBTQ community deserved it as punishment for being ourselves, I guess. I didn't have direct family affected by the AIDS epidemic. But in many ways, that's not true. I did have family affected by it. Because as I came out and I met more LGBTQ people, started to build that found family that so many queer folks build, how I learned the trauma that they faced, watching their loved ones die over and over again, attending numerous funerals a week for those they cared about, left to pass on because no one in power cared enough about them. I saw the pain in my queer elders, in their face when they told me these stories. And these elders are my family, my found family. And I saw that their trauma was a part of my legacy as a queer person, even if I wasn't directly affected by it. It also taught me that what happened to them could happen again to me or the people who came after me in my community. It also taught me that so many of my queer elders are dead because of that epidemic. How there are stories and legacies and histories and joys and successes and just life that I missed out on. A whole generation of people gone because of those who weren't fought for by those who could have done something. Which brings me back to today, back to the kids facing all of the things that I talk about. How, well, I'm not really that old right now. I do, in many ways, feel like a trans elder. And how my heart breaks and feels anger that once again people would try to pass on that trauma to a new generation. Your heart doesn't stop at some arbitrary state or national border. It doesn't stop because of an age difference. Your heart burns for those who are part of your community, regardless of who they are, because you want to protect them, to care for them, because they are your family. You want to fight for them. And your heart breaks knowing that you can't always do that. That you can't fight every battle, that you can't win every battle. And how it just builds and builds on top of you. Knowing that there are some that you can't save. My heart breaks. And I am not okay. Up until now, I've been reading a script, but I realized as I've been sitting here reading and filming this that there's one part that I missed in the script. Just what I'm feeling right now. I see all these things going on attacking the trans community, and I feel so much. I feel sadness. Just endless sadness that this is going on. And then it shifts to anger and pain. But I think what's worse sometimes is the numbness. How there's just so much going on and you just want to feel it all because it deserves to be felt. It deserves to feel the pain of it, and you want to feel the pain of it to make sure that you feel the totality of it. You don't want it to pass by because so many others will. I want to burn my insides every time something like this happens, but if I do that every time, there won't be any inside of me left. So you become numb sometimes. And that, honestly, is what feels worse. Sometimes that's how I know I'm not okay. I just can't feel anything. It's just been too much. There's been too much happening lately. It keeps growing and growing and compounding. For trans people, it's been a gamut. We carry the weight that everyone carries. Things going on in the world right now. And then we have been asked to carry even more baggage. All the while we're being yelled at and vilified for carrying it. And because of all that, people will be crushed. It tears me apart. I'll be honest, I've been so worn down these past few weeks. Between the numbness and the anger and the pain, I just feel tired and worn out. It's hard to keep fighting sometimes. That's why I haven't been able to make videos directly on Idaho or Florida or the Texas bills, despite desperately wanting to. I mean, if any of you haven't noticed, I've been so worn down in a few of my videos recently because it's just been a lot. There's also been some personal stuff too that I'll talk about in another video at some point, but all this stuff happening, it just weighs on you, especially when it's your job, or at least you want it to be your job to talk about these things. That's why I'm thankful that I do have a community. Why I'm thankful that while I'm worn out, people like my friends James Somerton or Council of Geeks have done their own videos on these events. Because that's what communities do. We try to fight for each other and lift each other up when we can, to shoulder the load, to carry it around, to spread it around as best we can. That's what families do. And I've just told you the story of my community, or at least the part of it that I know the most about. But my experience is one of many, and my perspective is limited. And also the trans community intersects with numerous others across borders, across racial lines, across many other things. For example, there are so many people of color in the LGBTQ community who deal with even more, for example, or how different identities have their own struggles and burdens. The trans community is but one, but we're all dealing with a lot right now on top of what everyone is dealing with. So, most importantly, to end out this video, the thing that I want to tell you out there, if you're transgender, is that it's okay if you're not okay right now. It's okay to have an emotional reaction to painful circumstances. That's normal. You're okay for who you are. You know, many people will try and tell you that there's something wrong in the village and that something wrong is you. But in truth, there's something wrong with the village and not you. But that being said, I want to tell you that if you're not trans, if you're an ally looking at all of this and watching this video, I want you to know that it is absolutely not okay that we're not okay, that all of us are not okay. This shouldn't be this way, and we need to fight to make sure it's not, to make a better tomorrow, a better future where we care for each other, where we all carry the load together, that it's not just put upon those who are suffering the most to carry it and share it. Because I've seen a better future. It's in the way our communities carry and lift each other up, how we carry each other's loads, how we take delight in each other, find joy in each other despite the pain, finding love and beauty even amidst the hardships. That's the better future. And so we're not okay, but I know that I'm going to be. Because I have people who care about me, and we have people who will care about each other, and I will care about others as best I can. And I'm sure as hell going to keep going to make sure others know it too. I came out here to film outside in this way too noisy of place, which, by the way, if you've been hearing planes and kids playing and all that stuff, I apologize. But I wanted to film here because I come to places like this to see the ocean, the mountains, which you can kind of see back there, because they remind me of the beauty in the world. That even in the worst of times, there's always still beauty. And if you hear the kids laughing and playing just a little down the hill from here, which has probably been messing with my audio a little bit, it reminds me that there's still humanity and caring and happiness. I'm not okay. I know most of you probably aren't either. And we're going to carry the load and scars of it for a long time. And yet there is still beauty to be found. And there are places that are unmarred. I'm not okay. But I will be again. And I'll fight so that others can be too. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I just wanted to make this video because I wanted to talk about how I've been not feeling okay these past few weeks. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the personal reasons in an upcoming video that I'll be sharing in just a few weeks. But I'll save that for that. But before I go, just a few other things to tell you about. First off, I just want to remind everybody that I have a secondary channel, Jessiegender After Dark, where all my news, reviews, and reactions are going to be going from now on. I've been doing Star Trek reviews on this channel for a long time, but I'm going to be moving them over there just to help build out that channel and also to keep this channel focused on videos that are sort of higher produced, bigger budget, and more focused in what they want to say. So if you like my Star Trek reviews, don't worry, they're not going away anywhere. I still want to do them. I still love Star Trek, and I'm still going to talk about Star Trek on this channel in more video essay format, but that channel is going to have my Star Trek reviews, so sort of weekly reviews of episodes and things going forward, as well as some other cool stuff that you should go and check out. Also, I have a Babylon 5 podcast that I do with the wonderful Council of Geeks, who I mentioned earlier in this video, that you should 100% check out. It's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite shows, and I would love to have you join us on that journey as I go back through one of my favorite science fiction shows of all time. But beyond all of that, don't forget to subscribe and comment down below. It really does help me out on this channel, especially in the comments. I would love to see people sharing support and love and caring for each other. That's what this video is about, and I hope that that's what it engenders and helps to share to other people. And then finally, I will also say thank you to my patrons who allow me to do this, who allow me to take time out of my day to be able to come to, you know, places like this to film, even though they are very loud, and to talk about stuff like this. I wouldn't be able to do that without the support of my patrons. So thank you, patrons, for giving me the grace to do things like this, to talk about things like this, because it's certainly helpful for me to talk about it, and you give me the chance to do so. So thank you, patrons, for just all that you've given me and the gift that you've given me to have this as a job, to be able to talk about these things. Beyond all of that, I just say thank you so much for watching, and hope that you, as always, my friends, live long and prosper. Am I wearing a Peacemaker cosplay with glasses underneath the helmet? Yes, I am. Don't think anything of it, because it is time to thank my wonderful patrons. Thank you so much for supporting me doing what I do and being able to buy weird, dumb cosplays like this, and especially an extra special spanking was the word that I almost wanted to say. Extra special thank you to Morgan the Pirate Queen, Joe Herman Holt, Miranda Janelle, Liz Tivy, DJ Samuels, Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Allen, Bo Kiki Yo, Lily Gray, Stephen Kleinard, Jem Shin, Matt Chung, Mary Mello, Randy Thompson, Ellie Gobert, Ish the Mad, Super Desi, D. Ray, Wellington Marcus, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Vincent Ellington, G-Man 42, Felicia Toast, Chloe Dollar, Joseph Dewey, Alex Miller, Sylvester Rota, Elizabeth Christensen, James Krivda, Dominic Noble, Barbara Ruski, Jennifer Fuss, Zone 1 Librarian, Jessica Wright, Suck Corgi, Sonia Nero-Perdo, Neathra Fraughton, Peter Landers, Frangato, Transit Toronto, Sasha M, Lee Arthur Boyd, Mountain Harpy, Celestial Dawn, When Dizzle Bizzle, Pissed and Twisted, Garage, Huh, Stephen Richardson, Melinda Walters, John Weatherby, Meadow Whisper, W. Brandy Edie, Cyber Quakey, Alyssa the Pagan, Beatrix Pruvis, Alex Owen, Kevin Frintag, Tiffany Danger, Lysa, Sean Piper, Casual Observer, Angie Pugh, Gretchen Badger Flynn, Cause I've got faith of the heart, 4, Maggie the Goblin, Audrey Assad, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Jess Johnson, William Stewart, Sky Skinner, Sarah Lamoureux, Sarah Bystam, Calisis, Eva Kniva, I'm sorry. Melody Ann, Winter's Good, Noble Monster Comics, Nathan Steele, Laura Demereux, Verdix Kai, Jason Knott, Hioresis, Spooky, Heather Sylvia, Troy Stull, Andrew K, Maeve, Polly Mina, Strawberry Pupter, Ashri Inda, Moo Nir Amlani, Emily Umis, Crit Fax, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Blade Upton, Michael Godey, Jenny Mabel, Elijah M, Ver, Bella Lugosi, Corey and Vale, Hunkanen. Woo! Thank you, every single one of you. I adore you all. Again, patrons, I could not do this without you. You let me do this and be a weird dork and just sing weird voices at the end of every video. Thank you so much, and I just appreciate you supporting me being weird and dumb and silly, and I send you my absolute love going forward. Mwah. Truly, from the bottom of my heart, you are wonderful.